The smoke alarm in the corridor had been beeping for 11 minutes when Mira Solis finally gave up on sleep. She sat up in the on-call room, still in her scrubs, her dark hair plastered to one cheek from where she'd been lying on it. Second year of nursing school. Third overnight shift this week. She was running on 4 hours and a gas station coffee that had turned cold somewhere around midnight. And the alarm, not a real emergency. Just the kitchen on the 3rd floor again, someone microwaving fish, was drilling straight through the base of her skull. She pulled on her sneakers without untying them, grabbed her bag and stepped into the hallway. That was when she heard the crash. Not the soft thud of a supply cart or a dropped tray, something harder, metal against marble, and then nothing. The kind of silence that felt deliberate. Mercy General's East Corridor was supposed to be empty at 2:47 in the morning. The surgical suites were dark. The administrative wing was locked. Mira stood very still in the fluorescent light, listening the way her grandmother had taught her to listen, not with your ears, with your body. Footsteps, 3 sets, moving fast, not running, the careful pace of men who did not want to be heard. She stepped back into a doorway. The men who came around the corner were not hospital staff. She knew that before she saw their faces, knew it from the way they moved, too coordinated, too alert, scanning the hallway ahead of them the way you only did if you'd been trained to look for threats. The one in the middle was taller than the other two, broad through the shoulders, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly stipend. Dark hair. A cut above his left eyebrow that was still bleeding, though he didn't seem to notice. He was the one they were protecting. Mira pressed herself flatter against the door. The man in the suit turned his head, and his eyes found her in the shadows without even searching for her. Like he'd known she was there the whole time. She should have run. She knew, even as it was happening, that she should have turned and walked the other way as fast as she could, without making it obvious. But something in the way he was standing stopped her. One hand pressed against his ribs, the suit jacket dark and wet on the left side in a way that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "You're bleeding through your shirt," she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't. The 2 men flanking him moved, just slightly. Just enough to close the distance between themselves and Mira, and she understood what that meant. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where you learned young what it looked like when someone was deciding whether you were a problem, but the man in the suit held up one hand. They stopped. He looked at her for a long moment, and Mira forced herself to hold the eye contact even though every reasonable instinct she possessed was telling her to look at the floor. "How bad?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried, like they were discussing this in the middle of the day in a coffee shop somewhere, instead of a deserted hospital corridor at 3 in the morning with blood soaking through his lapel. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'd need to see it." He studied her. She got the impression he was cataloguing things. Her scrubs, her bag, the ID badge clipped to her collar, the fact that she hadn't screamed or bolted. Then he said something to the man on his right in a language she didn't recognize, and the man produced a key card and opened the door behind her. "After you," the man in the suit said. It wasn't really an invitation. The room was a private consultation suite, dark except for the light the second man switched on. A small lamp on the desk in the corner. Mira set her bag down on the table and turned around. "Jacket off," she said. "And the shirt." He removed them without ceremony, handing both to the nearest bodyguard. The wound was on his left side, a graze. She thought at first, but deeper than a graze when she leaned in. Something had gone through the outer edge of the muscle, clean enough that it hadn't hit anything critical, but it was still bleeding steadily and it needed to be closed. "Do you have a name?" she asked, opening her bag. "Reinhardt," he said. "First or last?" "Last." She didn't push. She pulled on a pair of gloves, cleaned the wound with what she had, and started working. Her hands were steady. She'd learned early in clinicals that her hands would always be steadier than her pulse, and right now her pulse was doing something complicated. But her hands were fine. "You're not going to ask me how this happened," Reinhardt said. "It wasn't a question. Would you tell me the truth if I did?" A pause. "No." "Then I'm not going to ask. She could feel him watching her as she worked. Not the way patients usually watched, anxious, wanting reassurance. More like he was solving something. Like she was a problem he hadn't expected and he was running through the implications. "You're a nurse," he said. "Student nurse. 2nd year. You're good." "I know." She tied off the last suture and sat back. "You need a hospital. I'm in a hospital. You need to be admitted to a hospital. This is clean, but it's deep, and if it gets infected..." "It won't." She looked up at him. Up close, he was younger than she'd first thought. Late 30s, maybe, though there was something in his eyes that made the number feel irrelevant. Like age was something that had happened to him faster than it happened to other people. The cut above his eyebrow had stopped bleeding on its own. His jaw was set. He was the kind of man who had decided, probably at some point long before tonight, that his body was a logistical concern rather than something to be careful with. "You're welcome," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. "Thank you, Nurse Solis." She looked down at her ID badge, where her name was printed in small block letters. Of course he'd read it. He probably read everything. She stood up, snapped her gloves off, and started repacking her bag. "Keep it clean. Change the dressing every 24 hours. If you develop a fever above 101, don't be an idiot about it. I'll take that under advisement." The man on the right opened the door for her. Mira walked through it, back into the corridor, and kept walking without looking back. She got approximately 40 feet before she heard footsteps behind her, and then the man on the right was beside her, and he pressed something into her hand. A card, heavy stock, no name, just a phone number, and said, "Mr. Reinhardt would like you to accept this, in case you have concerns about the suturing." She looked at the card. "Tell Mr. Reinhardt he has my cell number on the patient intake form," she said. "He can call it himself if he's worried." She didn't fill out any patient intake form. She didn't bring him into the system at all. She didn't know at the time why she made that choice. Whether it was professional instinct or something else, something more like the understanding that putting a man like that into a database was something you thought carefully about before you did it. She didn't throw the card away either. She thought about it for 6 days, and then she stopped thinking about it. And then on the 7th day, she was coming off a 12-hour shift at the clinic on Briarwood Street when a black car pulled up to the curb beside her, and the window came down, and there he was. "You didn't call," Reinhardt said. "Neither did you." He considered this. "Are you hungry?" She thought about her apartment, the leftover noodles in the fridge, the paper she had due Monday. She thought about the card she'd kept in the front pocket of her bag for 7 days, without quite being able to explain why. "I need to change first," she said. "The car will wait." He took her to a restaurant that didn't have a sign out front, where the host knew his name, and led them to a table in the back that was separated from the rest of the room by a curtain. The 2 men who had been in the corridor with him were not present tonight. There were 2 different men seated at the bar, facing away from them, and Mira understood without being told that they were there for the same purpose. "You're always guarded," she said. "Always. Is that exhausting?" He seemed to genuinely consider the question. "It used to be. Now I don't notice it." She looked at the menu. The prices were not listed. She set it down. "Who are you, Mr. Reinhardt?" "You already know what I am." "I know what you look like," she said. "That's not the same thing." He leaned back in his chair, and she got the sense he was recalibrating, like she'd said something he hadn't expected, something that required a different approach. "My name is Aldrich Reinhardt. I run certain business interests in this city. Some of them are legal. And the ones that aren't are not something you need to concern yourself with. You're telling me who to be curious about. I'm telling you the parts that affect you." She leaned forward. "Then tell me the part that affects me. Why am I in this restaurant right now? Because you could have sent anyone to check on the sutures. You didn't." He was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved softly around them. Voices, the scrape of silverware, someone laughing too loudly near the door. "My physician," he finally said, "is no longer available. I'm a 2nd-year nursing student. You're very calm under pressure. You have good hands. You don't ask unnecessary questions." A pause. Most people, when they encounter what you encountered in that corridor, do one of three things. They panic, they bargain, or they try to use it afterward. He picked up his wine glass. You did none of those things. I was scared, she said. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. I know, that's what made it interesting. She sat with that for a moment. I can't be your doctor, Mr. Reinhardt. I'm not a doctor. No, but you could be available. For situations that require discretion. The word situations did a lot of work in that sentence. She knew what he was asking. She also knew, sitting here, that she'd known it was coming since he rolled down the window and asked her if she was hungry, and she'd gotten in the car anyway. I have school, she said. I know your schedule. Of course he did. She should have been unsettled by that. She was a little. But she was also tired. The deep bone tired of someone who had been working 2 jobs and carrying a full caseload for 3 semesters straight, and there was something in this man's directness that she found, without wanting to, almost restful. He wasn't asking her to pretend anything. He wasn't being warm. He was telling her exactly what the arrangement was. What does available mean, specifically? It means you're reachable. It means you come when I call. It means what you see stays with you. And in exchange, he named a figure, monthly. She managed to keep her face still. It was more than her mother made in a year. She looked at her water glass for a moment. Then she looked up at him. I have conditions, she said. He did not look surprised. Tell me. I'm not patching up anyone who doesn't want to be patched up. If someone says no, I leave. My school comes first. If I have an exam or a clinical rotation, that takes priority. And I don't witness anything I don't need to witness. You keep me away from the parts I shouldn't see. Agreed, he said immediately, which told her he'd already thought through all of it. And, she said, you eat better. You're running your blood pressure into the ground. I could see it in your color, even in that corridor. How long since you've had a physical? Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name. It wasn't the careful blankness from before. It was something older, something that had been boxed up for a long time. A while, he said. That changes. If I'm going to be your... She paused, because she didn't have a word for what she was agreeing to. Whatever this is, then I'm not watching you slowly kill yourself through neglect. That's a condition. He looked at her for a long time. You're 24 years old, he said. 25 in March, and you're negotiating conditions with me. You're the one who came to me, she said. You had 7 days to find someone else, you didn't. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but closer than before. He picked up the wine glass again. No, he said. I didn't. The first 3 months were almost ordinary in their way. She went to class. She worked her shifts at the clinic. Twice a month, she went to the address he texted her. A brownstone off Collier Street. Always the same side entrance, always let in by a different man, who nonetheless always knew her name. And she checked his blood pressure, reviewed whatever he'd been eating or not eating, and made notes in a small leather journal she kept for that purpose alone. Once she redressed a wound on his forearm that was healing badly. Once, she sat with him in a car outside a building for 2 hours while something happened inside that she didn't ask about, because the terms of their arrangement were that she didn't ask. She told no one. She thought about it sometimes, about telling her roommate Giselle, who was doing her practicum in pediatrics and would have had opinions. But every time she came close to it, something stopped her. Not fear, exactly. More like the sense that this was separate, that it lived in a different part of her life, and it needed to stay there. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she would learn. Ulrich Reinhardt. She never called him by his first name, though he'd given her permission to. And after a while she understood that he found her refusal to use it more interesting than compliance would have been, was meticulous in ways that had nothing to do with kindness. He ran his operation with a precision that she recognized from the outside as similar to the way a hospital was supposed to run but rarely did. Everything had a system, every person had a role. There were no redundancies and no waste and no sentiment, but he remembered what she told him, every detail. The name of the professor who'd given her a hard time on her second rotation, and 2 weeks later that professor's department suddenly had the funding for the equipment they'd been requesting for years. The fact that her mother had a gap in her dental insurance, and then the gap wasn't there anymore. Small things, delivered without acknowledgement, without strings, in the way of a man who was not comfortable giving anything away, but had decided she was an exception, and was managing the discomfort in the way he managed everything, systematically. She didn't say thank you. She understood instinctively that he would find it uncomfortable. Instead, she started bringing coffee. 2 cups, black because that was how he took it and she'd noticed, and setting one in front of him without comment, and he started drinking it. That was how things went between them for a long time. The night everything changed, it was raining. She'd gotten a call at 11 p.m., not the usual text, a call which meant something was wrong, and she'd taken a cab to an address she'd never been to before, a warehouse space in the port district that smelled of salt water and engine oil. There were more men here than usual. Everyone was moving quickly. No one was making eye contact with each other. She found Reinhardt standing over a man seated in a chair in the middle of the floor. The seated man was bleeding from his nose and looked like he'd been that way for a while. There were 2 other men nearby holding themselves with the specific stillness of people waiting to be told what to do. She stopped in the doorway. Reinhardt turned when he heard her come in. He said nothing. He just looked at her. The man in the chair looked up at her, and she knew even before he spoke that he was going to try to use her. She could see it in the calculation behind his swollen eyes. "Please," the man said. "Please, you have to help me. He's going to kill me." Mira stood very still. She looked at Reinhardt. His face was unreadable. The 2 men by the wall did not move. She had a condition. If someone says no, I leave. She'd said it in the restaurant. And he'd agreed, and she had held onto that condition like a specific kind of faith. The faith that the line existed, that it would hold, that she hadn't made a mistake she couldn't take back. She looked at the man in the chair again. He was alive. He was injured, but not critically. His nose was bleeding, not his chest. Whatever was happening here was not yet the thing she couldn't witness. She crossed the room, set down her bag, and crouched in front of him. "What's your name?" He blinked. "What? Your name?" "Terence." She looked him over, checked his pupils, pressed carefully along his jaw. "Terence, I'm not going to pretend I know what's happening here. But you're not in immediate danger from your injuries. I need you to stay calm. You need to get me out." "That's not something I can do," she said it quietly. "But I'm here, and that means something. Do you understand? I'm here." She didn't know why she said it. She meant it, though. She stood back up and looked at Reinhardt, and she said evenly, "He has a possible fracture along the right orbital. If that's a concern, you know how to reach me." And then she picked up her bag and walked out. She sat in the car for 20 minutes. Her hands were shaking finally. They always waited until after. She watched the rain on the windshield and thought about every decision that had led to this specific point and whether she could live inside those decisions. And she concluded, slowly, that she could. Not because she was certain she'd done the right thing, but because she'd done the consistent thing. She'd held the line exactly where she'd drawn it. The back door opened and Reinhardt got in. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You could have left the building." "I know. Why didn't you?" She turned and looked at him. He looked. She would think about this later, turn it over many times. He looked like someone who had asked a question and actually wanted the answer, which for him was not the usual state of things. "Because leaving isn't the same as staying clean," she said, "and because I said I was reachable, that includes nights I'm not comfortable with." He was quiet for a long time. "Terence Blum," he said finally, "has been selling information about my operation to a competitor for 8 months. The information he sold directly resulted in." He stopped. "3 people I was responsible for are dead." She absorbed this. "I see. I didn't bring you here for him. Then why? Because I needed." He stopped again, more abruptly this time, like he'd said something he hadn't meant to say and was deciding whether to let it stand. She waited. "Because I needed someone in the room who wasn't one of my men," he said. "Someone I trust to tell me when I've gone too far. The rain drummed steadily on the roof of the car. Mira looked at her hands, which had stopped shaking. "And have you?" she asked. "Gone too far?" "Not yet. Okay," she said. And then, because she thought it needed to be said, the 3 people who died. "That's not nothing, Aldrich." The first time she'd used his name, she saw him register it. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." She passed her boards in April, which meant she was now Nurse Solis in an official capacity, and Reinhardt had a car waiting outside the testing center even though she hadn't told him the date. She sat in the back seat and looked at the single white orchid on the seat beside her. No card, no note, just the flower, and she allowed herself privately to feel something she had been very careful not to feel for a long time. He was waiting at the brownstone, not in his office, where he usually received her, but in the kitchen standing over the stove with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, doing something to a pan that smelled extraordinarily good. She stood in the doorway and stared. "You cook," she said. He didn't look up. "Sit down." She sat. She watched him move around the kitchen, efficiently, no wasted movement, exactly the way he did everything, and thought about what it meant that he was letting her see this. The brownstone was his space. The kitchen was more than that. The kitchen was what people looked like when they weren't performing. He set a plate in front of her. She looked at it. "I passed," she said. "I know. How? I have a contact at the licensing board." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and he looked up from his own plate, and the expression on his face was something she'd never seen there before. Unguarded, almost startled by the sound. "You can't just have contacts everywhere," she said. "I do, though. That's terrifying. You've been aware of that since the corridor at Mercy General." I was in denial. He sat down across from her. For a few minutes they ate, and the kitchen was quiet, and Mira thought, "This is the most domestic thing that has ever happened to me, and the most absurd, and somehow also exactly right." "I need to tell you something," Reinhardt said. She set her fork down. "The man who shot me," he said, "in the hospital corridor. He wasn't a competitor. He was my brother." She absorbed this without moving. "My younger brother, Piers. He believes I am sitting on an inheritance that belongs to both of us. A set of accounts, old money overseas, set up by our father before he died. He is not wrong about the accounts. He is wrong about the division of them." He was looking at the table. "He's been escalating for 2 years. The corridor was the first time he went this far. And now it's about to get worse." He looked up. "I'm telling you because I need you to know. Not because I require anything from you, but because the situation it's becoming less controllable, and you are someone who operates in close proximity to me, and you deserve to know the shape of the threat." Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need? I told you, I don't require Aldrich." She said it deliberately. "What do you need?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I need someone who isn't loyal to me because I pay them," he said. "I have enough of those. I need someone who—" He stopped. "I don't know how to finish that sentence without sounding like something I'm not. Try anyway. Someone who sees me," he said, "clearly, and stays." The kitchen was very quiet. "I've been seeing you clearly since the corridor," Mira said. "I'm still here." He looked down at his plate, then back up, and for the first time since she had known him, Aldrich Reinhardt looked like a man who did not know what to do next, and she found, against all reasonable expectation, that she was glad to be the reason. Piers Reinhardt made his move on a Wednesday, which Mira would later think was a deeply unimaginative choice of day. He sent 3 men to the brownstone, which was a mistake, because Reinhardt had 6. What he did not send men to was the clinic on Briarwood Street, which was where Mira was, which he had either not known about or had dismissed as irrelevant. He sent himself instead. She was locking up when she heard the door, and then there was a man in the clinic who looked enough like Aldrich to be his brother. Same jaw, same height, softer somehow, which was not a comfort in the way it might have been, and he was looking at her with the specific attention of someone who had decided she was useful. "You're the nurse," Piers Reinhardt said. Mira turned around fully. She was still holding her bag. She thought about what was in it. Suture kit, scissors, the small canister of pepper spray she'd carried since her second year of school. She thought about the layout of the clinic, the exits, the deadbolt she hadn't thrown yet. She thought about what Aldrich had said, "I need someone who sees me clearly and stays." "Can I help you?" she said. "My brother thinks very highly of you." Piers moved to the counter, ran one finger along the edge of it, looked at his finger, performing ease. "That's unusual for him. He doesn't think highly of many people. Are you injured?" "This is a medical clinic." He smiled. "There are files, financial records. I think you know about them, my father's accounts. Aldrich told me he gave them to someone for safekeeping, someone outside his operation, someone he trusted." He looked at her. "I think that's you." She kept her face completely still. It wasn't her. She didn't have any files. Aldrich had never mentioned files, and this was either a bluff or a genuine misunderstanding, and either way she was alone in a clinic at 9 p.m., with a man whose brother had already tried to kill someone, and she needed to think. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "No. No." He watched her. She watched him back. She had learned, over the past year, what it looked like when a man was assessing her, and she had learned something else too. Something she hadn't expected, which was that she could hold the assessment. She could stay inside it without flinching, not because she was fearless, but because she knew who she was in relation to the people she stood next to. "I'm going to need you to leave," she said. "Or I'm going to need you to show me an injury, and if you can't do either of those things, I'm going to call the police." Piers Reinhardt tilted his head. "You'd call the police?" "In a heartbeat," she said. "Your brother and I have an arrangement, and that arrangement has never included me helping with anything that isn't medical. If he told you I have files, he was mistaken, or you're lying. Either way, I can't help you." He studied her for a long moment. Whatever he found, or didn't find, seemed to satisfy something, because he straightened up and adjusted his jacket and said, almost pleasantly, "You're not what I expected. Most people say that." He left. She locked the deadbolt, and then she sat down on the floor of the clinic because her legs had decided on their own that they were done standing for the moment. She stayed there for about 2 minutes. Then she got back up, got out her phone, and called the number she'd kept in the front pocket of her bag for over a year now. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he already knew. "Are you all right?" he asked. Not, "What did he say?" Not, "What happened?" "Are you all right?" She breathed out slowly. "Yes, your brother just left my clinic." "I know, I'm sorry. He thinks I have files." "I told him that." A pause. "It was a calculated misdirection. I needed him to believe the accounts were out of his reach. I needed him to believe that the person holding them was someone he couldn't touch without consequences from me." Another pause. "I should have told you I was doing it. That was an oversight." "An oversight," she repeated. "Yes, Aldrich, you used me as bait." "No, I used your existence as a deterrent. I was confident he wouldn't harm you without confirmation first. He's calculating, not reckless." A pause that was slightly too long. "I should have told you." She sat with that then. "Do you actually have files somewhere?" "Yes, where? With me?" She closed her eyes. "Of course they are. I can explain. I know you can. You're very good at explaining things in a way that makes them sound logical." She opened her eyes. "Come get me. We need to talk." The car was there in 7 minutes. When she got in, he was already in the back seat, and he looked at her with the careful attention of a man who was genuinely uncertain what was coming next, which, as far as she could tell, was not a state he found himself in often. "I'm not angry," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I understand why you did it. I even understand why you didn't tell me, because telling me would have made it real and would have required you to ask me something instead of just handling it. And you don't ask, you handle, and that's who you are." She turned to face him fully. "But I need you to hear me. We don't work if you're managing me. We work if you trust me, and those are different things." He was very still. "You trust my hands," she said. "You trust my silence. Start trusting the rest of it." The car moved through the wet streets. Somewhere outside, the city was doing what cities did at this hour, vivid and loud and completely indifferent. Inside the car, it was quiet. "The accounts," he said, "are significant. When my father died, he split them according to conditions Piers didn't meet. I've been protecting them not because I want what's in them, but because releasing them under duress sets a precedent I can't afford. He looked at her. I've been fighting this alone for 2 years, that is. He stopped. That is also not something I'm accustomed to saying. I know, she said gently. I don't know how to let someone in, he said. I know how to let people close. I know how to keep them at exactly the distance that's useful. I don't know how to. He made a gesture that was for him almost helpless. This, whatever this is. She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had said mine in a hospital corridor, not as possession but as protection, because she hadn't understood that yet. The man who had coffee ready, who remembered the names of her professors, who sent an orchid with no card, because a card would have required him to commit to something in writing. This is you trusting me, she said. That's all it is. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that. He looked out the window. The rain had slowed to something steadier, quieter. She could see his reflection in the glass, the careful set of his face, and underneath it, just barely, something that had been waiting for a long time to be allowed to exist. There's a meeting tomorrow, he said. I'm going to resolve this with Piers, one way or another. Do you want me there? He turned from the window and looked at her directly. Yes, he said. I do okay, she said. Then I'll be there. The meeting was not in a restaurant or a warehouse or any of the places she might have expected. It was in a lawyer's office in Midtown, 42nd floor, conference table that could seat 20. City spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Piers arrived with 2 men and a lawyer of his own. Aldrich arrived with Mira and one man named Garrett who stood by the door and said nothing for the entire duration. Piers saw her and something shifted in his face. You brought your nurse? She's here as a witness, Aldrich said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He set a folder on the table and slid it across to Piers. Our father's conditions notarized. My own accountant's records for the last 12 years audited, and a proposal, a settlement figure that is fair and that will close this permanently. Piers looked at the folder without opening it. Then he looked at Mira. Did he tell you what's in those accounts? What kind of money we're talking about? That's not something I need to know, Mira said. He's using you, Piers said. Whatever you think is happening between you, you're a convenience. He uses everyone. That's what he is. She'd thought about this, actually. She'd turned it over in her hands many times, the way you turned over something with an unfamiliar weight. The question of whether she had been used, the question of what used even meant in the context of an arrangement she had walked into with open eyes. I know exactly what I am to him, she said evenly. Can you say the same? Piers blinked. Open the folder, Aldrich said. The settlement took 3 hours and 2 more lawyers and a great deal of silence. Mira sat through all of it and said nothing else because she didn't need to. She'd said the things she came to say. When it was over and Piers had left, Aldrich stood at the window looking out at the city. Mira stood next to him. Below, the streets were the usual chaos. Yellow cabs and delivery trucks and about 10 million people who had no idea that something had been resolved up here in this room and that the shape of things had changed. It's over, she said. The accounts are frozen pending a full review. He'll get what he's owed. It'll take 6 months. He was quiet. My father made it complicated on purpose. He liked complicated, you don't. No, he turned to look at her. What you said to him, I know exactly what I am to him. What did you mean by that? She met his gaze. I meant that you're not capable of keeping people around for convenience. You don't trust easily enough for that. If I'm around, it's because you actually wanted me here. She paused. I was telling him that to make him doubt himself, but it's also just true. He was quiet for a long moment. You were right, he said. About trusting. He exhaled slowly. I've been managing you, I see that now. I've been giving you proximity and calling it trust. I know. I'd like to do better. She turned back to the window. The city was indifferent and enormous and full of noise. From up here it looked almost manageable. So would I, she said, with you, if that's what you're asking. He was quiet for another moment, and then his hand, careful, deliberate, exactly like everything he did, found hers at her side. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They stood at the window together while the city moved below them. And Mira thought about the smoke alarm that had been beeping for 11 minutes, and the footsteps in the corridor. And every choice after that which had led here, to this 42nd floor, to this man who was learning, slowly and in his way, that trusting someone didn't have to be a vulnerability. She thought it might take him a while to fully believe that. She had, it turned out, the patience for it.